So that's one of the crazy things about the corruption down there.
Did you have any hesitancy in getting involved in narco journalism knowing this? I mean, I would imagine that's one of the most dangerous avenues to pursue in journalism.
So this was little by little I got involved in covering this. So like going back to 2000, this hadn't happened. This war hadn't happened. It was still like a crime issue at that moment. So I began to cover these things, and then around 2004, I got a job for the Houston Chronicle out of Houston, Texas. I was a stringer covering Mexico for them. And I flew up to Nuevo Laredo, and there was a turf war beginning there, which is really the beginning of the drug war, which has torn Mexico apart. Began on the border with Texas in this city called Nuevo Laredo, over the bridge from Laredo, Texas, back in 2004. So there was a lot of interest from the Texas newspapers, what was going on. There's a whole bunch of bodies piling up there. But again, this going back to these days, and this is kind of innocent looking back, innocent looking at myself then and innocent looking at what Mexico was like then. They would simply say, go to the place, I'd drive up to Monterrey, rent a car, and just drive the car to Nuevo Laredo just by myself. And now people just don't do that. There's just too much crazy stuff going on. But back then it was still like, oh, you can just do that. So there was
When you say crazy stuff, like what kind of crazy stuff?
I mean, now you can get stopped by an armed group driving on those roads. You could just drive along, and there could be a group of guys with guns could stop the car, get someone out, take you away. I mean, there's a whole... People are a lot more careful about where you now when you move around the roads, you got to be very careful how you move and how you plan this stuff. You don't just wander by yourself, drive around these places. So back then when this was happening, and there was these bodies turning up, and I was trying to figure out why. And there was one guy interviewed who was the head of Chamber of Commerce, and I talked to him. A very interesting guy. About a couple of weeks later, he became the chief of police for the city. And they asked him, they said, are you scared? You scared about being killed? And he said, no, I'm not scared. It's only the corrupt people who get killed. And he was shot dead 6 hours after he gave that statement. They shot him dead. And that was one of the real markers of something really strange is going on in Mexico. Something is like going to erupt in Mexico. And then from there, it kind of just escalated and escalated. And I started working for other media, Time Magazine, New York Times, different people. And after a while, I said, I can't do this. I can't just write news stories about this. I've got to write books about this because this stuff is big and it's complicated.
It must be immensely complicated. For the people that live there, it seems like there's no escape. I mean, if you can't turn to the police are the cartel. There's the cartel, the police. All of the politicians, most likely, if they're alive, have to be compromised?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some very, very desperate people, and I mean, there's been some inspirational people as well fighting this. There's been heroes. There are heroes. Just to get more of a sense of what that means on the ground as well, and some of the things you see. Some of the things that stay with me. For a while, it was quite romantic covering this. It was like, wow, I'm going to these places where Chapo Guzman is from. I go up to the village and meet his mother and meet his family. I'm writing about these crazy people. But then you start seeing the human pain in all of this. One of many stories that stick with me was a mother in Monterrey, a school teacher. When you have armed guys moving around, they're also really affecting the civil population, attacking the civil population. And one mother, she was in her home with her 2 children in Monterrey. And it was like in the night just chilling in their house, and then the door broke down. And about 15 guys in bulletproof jackets all came in, long arms, just taking stuff from the house. Held the family, pinned them down. And they said to the mother, which of your children is the oldest? And she was like, didn't know how to reply. I mean, which of your children are the oldest? How do I reply to that? She just couldn't speak. And the eldest son, she had 2 sons, one 18, one 15. The 18-year-old was a philosophy student. And he said, I'm the oldest. I said, okay, you're coming with us. And took him away. And the next day she got a phone call saying, okay, we've got your son, give us this amount of money, we'll give him back. So she went round to relatives, just got the money. She wanted to get the money right away. She turned up with the money, gave some money, and then they just cut off the calls. She hadn't heard from him since. And I mean, seeing her face, the devastation, the pain. She said, just couldn't go on with life after that, and just not knowing, not having the closure. And I met her when I went to report on one of the worst atrocities, which was 49 bodies who'd all been decapitated, all had their hands and feet cut off, and all been dumped on a road. And they were taken to the morgue in Monterrey, and I arrived at the morgue. I was inside the morgue just smelling the smell of the dead bodies. This kind of weird smell you get from like decaying flesh, kind of like a sweet smell you get from when you're around those places where you can smell the bodies decaying. And I was inside the morgue, and I came out, and she was outside the morgue. And she was trying to see if her son might be among those people, among those bodies.
Wow. It's so insane that this is right next door to America, and there's so little effort put on doing something about it, including doing something to mitigate the influence of illegal drugs by making drugs legal. I mean, that would be one gigantic step. You're not going to stop people from doing drugs. I mean, this is an illogical, ridiculous approach. I don't think people should do most of those drugs. But when you make drugs illegal, only criminals are going to sell those drugs. And this is exactly what you have right next door to America. I mean, it's just unbelievably insane that there's this amount of crime a drive away from San Antonio.